Welcome to Viewpoint. Money in politics has become a heated issue in the 2016 presidential race, with candidates from both parties calling for some sort of reform of America's campaign finance system. How pervasive a problem is it, and what can be done about it? Joining me to help answer some of the questions is Michael Isikoff. He's chief investigative correspondent at Yahoo News and a former national investigative correspondent for NBC News. He's written extensively on numerous national news stories and is the author of 2 books, Hubris, the Inside Story of Spin Scandal and the Selling of the Iraq War, and Uncovering Clinton, a Reporter's Story. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Good to be with you.
Citizens United. I want to talk a bit about that, but first let's hear President Obama in his first State of the Union speaking to the issue as he addressed Congress.
Last week, the Supreme Court reversed a century of law that I believe will open the floodgates for special interests, including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections. I don't think American elections should be bankrolled by America's most powerful interests, or worse, by foreign entities. They should be decided by the American people. And I'd urge Democrats and Republicans to pass a bill that helps correct some of these problems.
Well, it didn't happen. Bill didn't get passed. It didn't even get raised. But let's talk a little about Citizens United, for those who don't know. Exactly what did the decision do? What did it undo from what had been campaign finance before?
Actually, you know, this had been a trend in a number of Supreme Court decisions that were basically undermining the original principle of limitations on how much an individual could give.
That was part of the McCain-Feingold.
Well, they actually go back even further to the post-Watergate era, but McCain-Feingold sought to ban so-called soft money, which was unlimited contributions to the political parties. But, you know, very quickly they began migrating to these outside organizations, and what Citizens United did was essentially ratify that outside organizations could not be limited in how much they poured into an election. So you had corporations, labor unions, and individuals who were basically given a green light to spend as much money as they wanted on a election campaign. And the fig leaf was these outside organizations were supposed to be independent expenditures, not coordinated with campaigns. But we have gradually seen a erosion of that fig leaf to the point where now it's routine for candidates to raise money for so-called super PACs, outside organizations that are spending unlimited amounts on their behalf. There's the lines between the campaigns and these outside groups become, you know, are almost entirely erased at this point. So much so that the super PACs themselves are identified with the particular candidates they're supporting. Of course, and you have now a handful of a relatively small number of very wealthy individuals who essentially create their own super PACs on behalf of their favored candidates, who they work and talk to on a regular basis. So just to give you an example, I pulled a few. You have the Ted Cruz campaign with sort of 4 super PACs backing it. Each super PAC is being funded almost entirely by some billionaire friend and supporter of Ted Cruz. One, Robert Mercer, who's a big private equity guy, $11 million to one super PAC keep the promise. Another, Toby Neugebauer, $10 million to keep the promise to another super PAC that's backing Ted Cruz. Stacey Wilkes, who's a fracking equipment billionaire, $10 million to a third super PAC. So the Cruz candidacy, here you have 3 billionaires who have poured over $30 million into the super PACs that are helping to propel his candidacy. Now, it's not just Cruz and it's not just Republicans.
We're going to look at all of them in a little bit, but
George Soros on the Democratic side, $8 million almost entirely to super PACs that are backing Hillary Clinton. So this is a bipartisan phenomenon at this point. Both parties are doing it, and you know, that definitely sort of fuels the perception that you have a handful of extremely wealthy people who are tilting the scale on behalf of the candidates of their choice.
Polls show the American people don't like it. Here's one poll that shows how they feel about Citizens United. It says that 78% think it was a bad decision, 17% a good decision, and then money's influence in politics, bad or good, 84% say bad, including Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. So there's a sense that there's something that stinks out there, but they don't know quite what to do about it. Let's look at now, you started with the Cruz campaign, but let's look at all of them, because basically you got, this is not a problem, as you note, of one candidate, it's of a number of the candidates. Here's Clinton. Her super PACs have raised 47.9, Bush 123. Most of the money coming from that his candidacy has raised is from super PAC. Cruz again, more than half. Rubio, Kasich less, although his spending from super PACs has been a big factor in the New Hampshire contest, where his super PAC money was focused almost exclusively on a couple of his opponents to drive his numbers up. So it's a huge amount of money that's going. It reminds me of the Adelson money with Gingrich.
I mean, this, you know,
Gingrich's campaign was almost exclusively funded there,
and was entirely propelled because Newt Gingrich, because Sheldon Adelson, Las Vegas casino operator, billionaire, poured tens of millions of dollars to prop up Gingrich's candidacy and help sustain him far beyond the point that he would have, that the voters were.
And he went nowhere.
And he went nowhere. And he went nowhere.
Not a good investment.
Actually, speaking of going nowhere, so I'll give you a little anecdote that I found amusing. I'm in New Hampshire the morning of the New Hampshire primary, and I turn on the TV, and there's a ad attacking John Kasich for being a Wall Street banker. And I'm curious, well, who's paying for this one? And you know, at the bottom it says paid for by something called America Leads. Who is America Leads? I look it up. It's the super PAC that was backing Chris Christie, because at the time Christie thought, you know, Kasich was the establishment lane guy who he had to knock out so he could become that person. So who's funding America Leads? I look it up, and you know, I see, to my astonishment, Steve Cohen, who is, you know, Wall Street hedge fund billionaire extraordinaire, had been under investigation for years by the FBI for insider trading. Actually, his firm, which had to go out of business because they paid a multi-million-dollar fine to settle that case, was the prime bankroller of the ad, the super PAC ad attacking Kasich. So you had, this was super rich with irony, Wall Street hedge fund billionaire bankrolling an ad attacking Kasich for being a Wall Street banker. As you know, it just shows that you know, in this super PAC world, anything goes, and a small number of people, Steve Cohen and his wife, put something like $4 million into that super PAC for Chris Christie.
So consistency and moral integrity have nothing to do with this game.
No, but it gives you, it shows you how a small number of very wealthy people can try to influence our elections. And
so let's look at some of the super PACs. We
Sure.
did there's 4 of them we have up.
Yeah.
The Right to Rise Bush one,
Right.
raised 118 and spent
Right.
84. The Rubio one has spent more than it raised.
Yeah.
So too with the Kasich one, and Cruz. You mentioned one of them.
Right. There are 4 of these.
Here's the Clinton
Cruz.
one. She has spent the least so far from her particular PAC.
So far, but you see, she's got a pretty good
war
kitty
chest
in the bank, war chest in the bank that will
it's
be
interesting.
unleashed at the right time.
I am, to be straight out about it, I'm a DNC member.
I'm aware
I got
of
a
that.
mailing
Yeah.
a little while back when Hillary was undergoing the attack over Benghazi. And it was a book from Amazon. I said, I didn't order this. What is it? I opened the package, and it was a book, David Brock, who has his own super PAC.
Right.
And it was a book making the Hillary case on Benghazi, sent to DNC members.
Right.
But what struck me was in the box were coupons. One was for free wine. Another was for, there were 3 coupons
Yeah.
for freebies.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is very weird.
Yeah.
Are they, I mean,
Who was providing the free wine?
I don't know. And I was,
I'd
I
like
thought,
to follow up on that.
I wondered
yeah.
how this
Yeah.
could occur that you get a super PAC spending money this way.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm certainly would be interested in looking into that. But David Brock is an interesting character because he's got the one super PAC called Correct the Record that has
And that's what the
actually-
book was trying to do.
Yeah, which has actually said openly that it is coordinating with the Clinton campaign. It sort of dropped the fig leaf even entirely and just saying, we are a super PAC. We're going to work with the Clinton campaign. And actually, if you looked at the Clinton campaign finance reports and their own finance reports, you see that the Clinton campaign paid something like $280,000 to correct the record for, quote, research. So they are the Oppo research arm of the Clinton campaign. And there's really no distinction between the campaign and the super PAC, which, unlike the campaign, which is limited to collecting checks of $2,700, can collect 6-figure and even 7-figure checks from wealthy donors.
So we have these PACs, the Bush one in the 100 million range.
Yeah.
What's interesting in this election is that if you look at the money raised versus the votes achieved, there's almost
not a great payoff.
Right.
Yeah. Well, look at Steve Cohen's $4 million, totally down the drain because Chris Christie is now out of the race. Right.
And Bush has spent 84 million of it already.
Right.
To get near double digits only.
Well, to be fair, this is one of the comebacks to those who bemoan the influence of money on politics, saying, look, just because you have these super PACs, just because they spend large amounts of money is no guarantee of electoral success. And that's true, but it sure helps a lot, and it sure hurts those who are unable to raise these kinds of sums.
And it can help shape issues. It can help put
absolutely.
issues on the agenda.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's look at some of I mean, big money isn't only the super PACs. It's also, as you noted, the billionaires who can spend unlimited amounts of money.
Right.
And also the lobbyists who can bundle.
Right.
Talk to me a little about that, because that's another issue here of a way that big money plays a role.
Right. And look, as I was saying before, the campaigns are still, have their hands tied by these campaign limits, which go back to the post-Watergate era. They've been adjusted for inflation over the years. But if you want to donate to Hillary Clinton, the most you can write a check is $2,700, right? But the people who really have the influence and can be helpful here are the so-called bundlers, the people who go around collecting 100 of those $2,700 checks from their closest friends and then can deliver them to the campaign in hundreds of thousands of dollars of quantities. you now, if you're a lobbyist, for instance, and you are a bundler, that has to be reported to the FEC. So there are these lobbyist bundler reports, and one of the things I think is striking is the Clinton campaign, because this has become an issue with Bernie Sanders, who's running against the billionaire class and the role of special interests and the role of big money in politics. The Clinton campaign has been collecting checks from bundlers who lobby for big Wall Street banks like Goldman Sachs and Citibank and Morgan Stanley, for big pharmaceutical companies, pharma, private equity companies, the fossil fuel lobby, all these special interests that Hillary Clinton says she's going to stand up against. Their lobbyists have been raising large sums of money for the Clinton campaign. So that's the kind of contradiction that I think it does raise questions when a candidate says, I'm going to stand up to these people. Yeah, but they're the people who are helping to fund your
Bernie
campaign.
raised that in the last debate.
He
and
did.
Made the joking comment, well, they're just giving the money just to throw it around.
Yeah.
But there is a direct impact. I mean, William Greider in his book, Who Will Tell the People, notes the impact on the banking system, on pharmaceutical regulation, on regulations of all sorts in the industry.
Of
and
course.
for those of us in the Arab community, there's the question of how Israel gets treated in Congress. With Hillary, for example, Hillary Clinton has received an enormous amount of money from Chaim Saban.
Right.
And then sends him a letter pledging her support for Israel and opposition to any boycott effort against it. There's an impact here.
Chaim Saban has said he's going to spend whatever it takes to elect Hillary Clinton. And I
just
think
as Adelson on the other side is doing
just as Adelson is
They called it the
on
Adelson primary.
Yeah. Now look, I mean, if you want to know, does money make a difference? I mentioned George Soros before, who has given $8 million to Hillary's pro-Hillary's super PACs. There's an email that was released as part of the State Department release of Hillary Clinton's emails, in which Neera Tandem, who's a former Hillary Clinton, very close advisor, now at the Center for American Progress, writes to Hillary on our private email address. This, I think, is somewhere around 2010. Was at a dinner last night with George Soros, and he wanted you to know how much he appreciated the fact that he can always call and see you when he wants to discuss a matter of policy. Now, just on its face, does money buy access? Well, I think there you have it in, living color, George Soros talking about how he can always get through to Hillary Clinton to discuss a matter of policy. Can most voters always get through to Hillary Clinton? Were they able to when she was Secretary of State? Of course not. So I think it's pretty undeniable that while it might be difficult to show that some policy decision was changed as a result of some huge campaign contributions, that, by the way, would be actually a criminal violation of the law if you could show that, it's pretty clear that the people who are giving these bucks expect and receive access that the rest of the electorate does not.
There's another way that big money plays a role, and that's the revolving door. You get out, Kasich goes to work at the big banks.
Went to work for Lehman Brothers. That was the basis of the
Mrs. Clinton and Jeb Bush go on the speaking tour.
Right.
She gets more money than he does, but the money's not insignificant.
No.
His 50,000 fees may not compare to her 250,000 fees, but that's a lot of money.
Her former Deputy Secretary of State, Tom Nides, left the State Department, became Vice Chairman of Morgan Stanley, then becomes a Clinton bundler for this campaign, and has helped raise over $200,000 from Morgan Stanley executives for the Clinton campaign. Does that matter? Does it make a difference? Are these people giving money against the interests of their companies that they work for? Those are legitimate questions.
there's a final way that big money plays a role, and that is billionaires themselves running for office. And it's not just Donald Trump.
We've got,
I mean, it's actually become a situation where in the U.S. Senate, the respective parties, Democrats and Republicans, will look for self-funding guys who it reminds me of the old soap opera syndrome, where the sort of the middle-aged woman, tired of being the socialite, says, "I'm so bored, I'm going to open a business."
Right.
These guys get bored and decide to run for Senate and self-fund.
Right.
This is now becoming what you do for the president.
Right. Well, I mean, Trump is the premier example. And, you know, I got to say, I mean, remember, this isn't the first time.
Ross Perot predated him.
Right. Ross Perot predated him. You know, Trump has talked about it for years. I remember back in, 2011, he was talking about running in 2012. Began at the time to do the usual kind of vetting, looking at his business record, his bankruptcies and all. And, I concluded he was never going to be able to run for president. He never would. This was all just, fun and games. But I was proven wrong on that, because here he is.
And now you have Michael Bloomberg threatening the same.
Right. Well, I think if Bloomberg sees that Trump is indeed going to become the nominee, and if it looks, I think it only works for Bloomberg is if Hillary becomes in serious trouble, and we'll know that soon enough. Serious trouble electorally. I mean, it looks like Sanders is going to do. It might actually have a shot at the nomination. Then a Bloomberg candidacy becomes entirely plausible. And why should Michael Bloomberg be the guy that America turns to? The only reason is he's a billionaire and can pay for it himself. Doesn't mean he's the most qualified individual in the world. It just means
the argument that the billionaire
wealthiest.
makes, from Perot to Trump, is that I'm not beholden to anybody because I'm a billionaire and I fund myself. Is that true?
Well, I mean, there's a point there that, you can, if you're a Bloomberg or a Trump, you can afford to thumb your noses at a lot of people who you might not be able to if you needed their money. But it still come back to the question, does that mean that these people are necessarily the most qualified to be president, or the people we should be looking for to solve our national problems? I mean, that's a legitimate
then there's the way
question.
That Trump sort of, in a sense, gets hung on his own petard by the record he has of buying politicians before he was in office.
Right.
And now having all of a sudden gone through this conversion of I can't be bought. I buy people. I can't be bought.
Well, look, the contradictions of Donald Trump, we could write volumes on that.
Talk about Bernie Sanders. It's a very interesting phenomenon, because even in the Obama case of 2008, huge number of personal donors, private donors, but a lot of bundled money. I mean, there were number of instances where the president, the candidate, and then in 2012 the president, was doing these dinners all over the country, $35,000 a pop, money to go to the party victory fund. And a very small group of people got to go, and in fact I know people who went to multiple dinners, paying for themselves and their wives and then their children, just they became their own personal bundlers. But here's a candidate who's funded but completely by private donations. When he announced in his victory speech in New Hampshire, he said, "Here's my fundraiser. I'm going to New York not to do a fundraiser. Here's my fundraiser. Log on to my website." And in 48 hours, $8.1 million raised. That's interesting.
It is interesting. He's clearly tapped into something out there that I don't think anybody saw coming. I mean,
we saw it a little bit. Remember the John McCain in 2000? Right after New Hampshire, 650,000 in one night. And then Howard Dean, same thing. I mean, it was an internet-driven campaign. I think the magnitude of it today is what's astounding.
And look, I mean, I think if, 2 or 3 years ago, somebody had tried to tell either one of us that Bernie Sanders was going to be a credible candidate for a presidential nomination, we would have laughed at them. I mean, You know, he is an avowed socialist. His roots go back, you know, he ran on Socialist Workers' Party tickets in years past. He just was not somebody you would have expected to be a man, you know, to catch on. But he is, you know, clearly tapped into a discontent out there. And much like Trump, has defied all the rules. So this is a very strange year, is all we can say.
Is it possible to fund campaigns? Bernie's doing it, but would it be possible if all campaigns were funded this way, which is, of course, what the campaign finance reform people want?
Right.
In effect, you'd have to win 2 votes. You'd have to win the money vote, which is truly a money vote, small contributions from a whole lot of people, and then the actual vote, as opposed to
it only works.
10 million in a PAC competing with somebody who's raising money from small donors.
It only works if the Supreme Court overturns Citizens United, because as we've discovered, these campaign limits, which, as I said before, go back to the days, you know, of right after Watergate, are increasingly meaningless when people can write. I mean, I always thought one of the more bizarre, you know, things is you have downtown Washington, the Federal Elections Commission, which reviews campaign finance reports to see that everybody's dotted the I and crossed the T on their donations of anywhere from $100 to up to $2,700, and you know, you have to put down who your employer and your address and all that, and there are auditors who are checking all that. And meanwhile, people are writing $10 million checks, $11 million checks, entirely unregulated by the FEC. So what is the point, you might ask, of I-specking those $100 donations, which the FEC does, when people can write these 7 or 8 figure checks? It's pretty
other than the Supreme Court, is there a political will? I mean, we look at the polls. The American public says they're fed up with it. They don't like it.
Right.
But then Donald Trump wins a primary.
Is it the issue that voters are prepared to cast their ballots on?
Is it a priority?
Yeah, how
what
high
makes
a priority?
it a priority?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I've thought this for some time, that until we have a real scandal of Watergate-type proportions, it's probably not going to move the needle. Now, look, we are going to get, at some point, a new Supreme Court justice who's going to replace Scalia. That could tip the scale. Citizens United was a 5-4 decision. If an Obama nominee replaces Scalia and gets confirmed, there's a shot that Citizens United could be reversed. I noticed that Bernie Sanders, right off the bat after Scalia's death, said, if I'm elected, I will appoint somebody who will overturn Citizens United. He's made it a litmus test. I haven't heard that from Hillary Clinton yet, because it's somewhat taboo to impose litmus tests on who your Supreme Court pick is. But I thought it was interesting that for Bernie Sanders, at least, this was a litmus test.
I mean, because it occurs to me that they do that. The Supreme Court does that. Say they do it. Yeah. You still have to have legislation that creates a new finance system. And the question is, can the people who are funded by big money write laws that get rid of the role of big money? And as long as there's big money there, like water, isn't it going to find its way in?
That has been the argument against campaign, restrictions from the get-go, and that's true. But you can make it harder.
Yeah. Listen, it's a fascinating discussion, and it doesn't get.
It's not going to go away. It's not going to go away.
Listen, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
There's plenty more to talk about, and I hope we'll get a chance to do it later in the year.
Anytime.
It's all the time we've got for now. For more information, you can follow us on Twitter at AAIUSA, or you can check out our website at aaiusa.org. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week on Viewpoint.